What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon 466 Cards. With the NBA playoffs starting up, I thought it'd be a good time to go over the criteria I use to evaluate NBA players to see whether or not they have long-term hobby value or investment potential, whatever you want to call it, right? I've created a longer video that explains how I got to these four criteria. I'll link to it in the description below, but for the sake of brevity and keeping this short, I'm not going to get into it too much here, but I will do an overview. Before I get started, though, I should say that you shouldn't take this as investment advice. This is just my personal beliefs. Please do your own research. If you do think this is a useful video and you decide to follow it, don't blame me if it doesn't work out. All right? Don't sue me. That's kind of where we're at. All right. Disclaimers are out of the way. Let's jump right into it. The first criteria I use is, can this person be a generational GOAT? And I think that's pretty straightforward, right? Does this person have the potential to be this generation's Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Tom Brady, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, that type of thing? Pretty straightforward. Obviously, those type of players have hobby value, long-term hobby value. The second one, very closely related to that, does this person have the potential to reach milestones, have accomplishments and awards like MVPs, be the number one option or the lead option on a title winner or a contender? Again, very similar to MJ, LeBron, Tom Brady, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, that type of thing, right? So those two are very closely intertwined. The third one, though, is specific to winning championships. And in this case, it's not just about the player. It's about the system and the organization around the player, because that's also important, and that is outside the player's control. You can be a great player, but if you don't have good and proper support system around you, you're fighting a very uphill battle. And that talks about smart management, smart ownership, and asset management. And what that means is draft pick capital or other young players to grow with the player. And examples of how this doesn't work out is Donald Sterling and the Clippers, the Knicks GMs for about the last 20-25 years up until the most recent regime here. Those type of things will hold a great player back. You can be an awesome generational player, but if you were playing for the Clippers or the Knicks in the last 20-25 years, you had no chance of winning anything, right? And that matters. And it's overlooked often in the hobby when evaluating prospects and young stars. So that's the third thing. The fourth criteria I use is whether or not a player, his personality, his style of play, does it inspire emotion? The perfect example of this is Kobe Bryant versus Tim Duncan. To me, Tim Duncan was a better player than Kobe Bryant, full stop, no question. Kobe Bryant, though, has way more hobby value because his play was exciting. It inspired emotion. Black Mamba, this, all that. Tim Duncan was boring. And that is important in the sports card world. It's less important when you're trying to evaluate players just based off how good they were, how much value they had to their team, how much they made their team a winning team. But for purposes of hobby value, this does matter, right? And you can see that in the discrepancy between Kobe's hobby value and Tim Duncan's hobby value. So those are the four criteria. Now let's jump right into it. Let's go through the Eastern Conference and a list of stars. You can see here, I have the four criteria, and I'm just going to go through players and touch on them and explain to you why I think what I think. First player is Jason Tatum. He could absolutely win an MVP. He has a good system around him in Boston. I think he can at times inspire emotion, but I don't think he will ever be a top 1 to 3 player in the NBA. He's not going to be better than Jokic. He's not going to be better than Luka. And there's just a ceiling. Like, he could be a top 5, top 7 player, but he's not going to be... Nobody's ever going to... To me, right now, as of this moment, I don't think there's a likely scenario where someone's going to say Jason Tatum was the GOAT after Steph Curry and LeBron. Like the next generation's GOAT. I don't think that's possible. Similarly, Jaylen Brown, basically the same argument as Tatum, but I think Jaylen Brown is not as good as Jason Tatum. So that's just where we're going to end there. Maybe learn how to dribble with your left hand. Cam Thomas, he's not good enough. I'm just going to keep it straightforward. He's just not good enough. He scores a bunch of points, but he's just not good enough. Jalen Brunson, this is interesting. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have left this individual achievements box blank as well. But he's shown to me that there is a scenario where he could be first team All NBA, and in theory could win an MVP some way somehow. It'd have to be in perfect conditions, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. But I don't think there is a path for him to be a top 3 to 5 player in the NBA in his career, which is not a knock. He could be consistently a second team All NBA, but he's just not going to be top 5. Tyrese Maxey, similar to Brunson, he doesn't quite have the court vision and passing ability to unlock the possibility of one day becoming a player, like possibly winning an MVP. And if you can't win an MVP, you're not going to be a generational GOAT. Scotty Barnes, he doesn't have any of these things. You know what? The reason why I left the ownership and management box blank is I know Masai Ujiri has won an NBA title, but some of the stuff he's done recently has made me question what he's doing. And so I don't think Scotty Barnes is good enough on any of these criteria. We'll keep going. Donovan Mitchell, he's like a top 10, 20 player in the NBA. And if you're that, you're never going to be a generational GOAT. You're not going to win an MVP. You're not going to be first team All NBA. Next one, Cade Cunningham. His team sucks. And I feel like he's kind of trapped there. And without the possibility of being traded, it's not going to happen for him. And that says less about him and more about the team around him, the ownership around him, the management around him, the coaching around him. He's got no shot in the current environment. And I should say for all of these things could change. But this is where I see them now and the most likely path forward for these players. Tyrese Halliburton, I think, has the possibility to do all of these things. But where I see him being is this generation's Steve Nash because of the limitation of ownership and management, similar to what Steve Nash had in Phoenix. Robert Sarver, obviously come out now, he's awful. The Pacers' ownership is not awful, but they're just cheap. And they don't have a lot of draft capital left. And there's no second star, and the fact that they wasted a bunch of stuff on Pascal Siakam and are going to pay him a bunch of money, he's not the right guy to be your number 2 or paying him like a number 2. And that's the limitation on Tyrese Halliburton. It has nothing to do with Tyrese Halliburton himself. It has more to do with how they decided to pay and acquire Pascal Siakam and the lack of draft assets left on their team. Trae Young, to me, one of the most overrated players in the NBA because of his defensive liabilities and his size. He will, literally, unless he's playing with Anthony Davis or Wemby, which is very possible, he's not going to ever win a championship. And that's just my opinion. He doesn't have the chops to win MVP unless he's paired with one of those guys. And in that case, those guys should win an MVP. So we'll keep going. LaMelo Ball, he's not a serious player to me. He makes fun highlights, but the way he plays is not winning basketball. Let's keep going. And Charlotte ownership, small market, doesn't have a lot of money. They just sold. Well, they finally got out of Michael Jordan's ownership, so that's a good thing. But I just don't see it from LaMelo Ball. And Tyler Hero doesn't have any of these things. He's just not good enough. All right. So that's the Eastern Conference. Let's now do the Western Conference. Jonathan Kuminga, not good enough. Maybe one day he could be good enough, but I don't see a likely path forward at this point in time. Maybe he shows me something next year, but as of right now, not happening. Devin Booker, he, in the right scenario and in the right circumstances, I could see him being an MVP candidate. But the Phoenix ownership and management has clearly proven to be questionable under the new owner in Phoenix, and they literally have nothing they can do. They're out of draft capital and assets. They're beyond the second apron of the luxury tax, which is like a very complicated tax thing that I won't get into, but it's just they are very limited in what they can do. And so I think Devin Booker's out for me for those reasons. De'Aaron Fox, nice player, not good enough. Keep going. And I mean, ownership and management of the Kings, I think that speaks for itself. The fact that this is the first time they've been successful in the last 25 years or 20 years, like I think that says it all. Jamal Murray, he's always going to be in Jokic's shadow. So while he will win titles, he might win more titles, he will never get the GOAT tag because Jokic is there and he's the primary number one. Anthony Edwards, so this is interesting. He could absolutely have the potential to be the generational GOAT, win an MVP. His style of play with the dunks and his unbelievable athletic ability definitely inspires emotion. The problem here is ownership and management. Just Google what's happened with the T-Wolves ownership situation. That's the first thing. Second thing is they paid a crap ton of assets to acquire Rudy Gobert, and they're going to have salary cap issues with paying Karl Anthony Towns $50-60 million. So it's that stuff that I believe will hold Anthony Edwards back from having potential. It has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with his organization and how they've deployed their draft capital and assets. Here's the first one that I have that fills all the buckets. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has proven himself to be a top 5 player in the NBA. I think he should finish probably second or third this year in MVP voting. So no question about that. His OKC has great management. They have a bajillion draft picks. Like I literally think they have 30 draft picks in the next 5 or 7 years. And he's calm, cool, and collected, and that also in a way inspires emotion. So SGA is the first player that I've thought of that fills my 4 criteria for having long-term hobby value. Luka, I won't get into how great he is. He's an unbelievable talent, once in a generation. The problem is the ownership and the team management. And I know they acquired Kyrie. I know they've done some stuff, but they've had to make a lot of trades to get rid of dead weight. First example, Grant Williams. And to acquire players back, and they keep on trading away draft picks and draft pick swaps. And while that is minutia that's down the road, there's like not a lot of flexibility left in what they can do. And Kyrie's not exactly a spring chicken either, and has in the past not proven to be exactly reliable. All of these things have nothing to do with Luka Doncic. It has everything to do with the team and the organization around him. But that matters, and I think that's often overlooked in evaluating hobby value and hobby value potential. And so that's why, to me, I actually wouldn't be putting too much money into Luka cards. All right, let's keep going. Jalen Green. If you had asked me this 6 months ago, I wouldn't have even put him on this list, just to be clear. But now, from what I've seen in the last 2 months, there might have been a light bulb that went off in his head where the game's slowing down for him and he's seeing things in a way that he hasn't viewed the game before. And it's mostly about IQ stuff, passing stuff. And that, if that's real, and I don't know if it is, that does unlock a lot more upside in him. The inspires emotion part, I'm not sure at this point. He does have a lot of great dunks and stuff, but he also does a lot of stupid things on the court. Where if he gets rid of some of that, then that this box here for inspires emotion for him, that could change. Ja Morant, I think his limitations are he will never be the generational GOAT because it seems like he's got some issues, and that's going to hold him back. And I'm just going to leave that there. Zion is basically the same thing, except the thing that's holding him back is his health, his weight, whatever you want to call it. It's a little bit different than John Morant, which is more personal stuff, but they're very much intertwined together. And then the last one is Wemby. Good God, yes, all of the above, all of the above. This guy is like, he is an alien. He is unlike anything the NBA has ever seen in the last 40, 50 years at least. And like Wilt Chamberlain might be the closest example of a comparison. Just this guy is like, it's literally 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what he's doing is unfathomable. And so as a result, give him all of the boxes. You know, it's clear to me that he has that potential. Whether or not he fulfills it and is healthy enough, who knows, right? But that's the breakdown of a lot of young stars that exist today. And if you look at this, you'll notice there was no players from the Eastern Conference that I selected, and only 2 from the Western Conference. That's SGA and that's Wemby. The reason for this is, to be a generational GOAT, that means there's not a lot of you. And to be a hobby GOAT, there's only a handful that exists. And so that's why there's not a lot of these people, a lot of these players that fill this criteria. There's only 1 or 2 of them by definition. And so that's why if you have criteria that leads to a list of 5 or 10, that's not good criteria, because there's no way that all 5 of those players can become generational GOATs. So that's the video. Would love to hear your comments and thoughts. As we do sometimes on the channel, we preview the next video. The next video, we're going to talk about how there are ways to misuse pop counts. We'll talk about that next time. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching. I will talk to you all soon. Cheers.